And at this time, I'd like to turn things over to Kate McElwee, who is the Executive Director of Women's Ordination Conference, to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Russ, and thank you, Deb, and for having me tonight. And it's wonderful to be with all of you. I have the privilege of introducing our speaker tonight. So sit back because she's a very qualified woman. So I'm very excited to share that Dr. Jill Peterfeso is a cultural historian of American religion who uses ethnography to explore questions of gender, authority, and creativity in Roman Catholicism and Mormonism. Professor Peterfeso is the Eli Franken Craven and Minnie Phillips Craven Associate Professor of Religious Studies at Guilford College and has served as the chair of the Religious Studies Department since 2015. At Guilford College, she teaches a range of courses, which I would love to take all of these: Catholicism, Sex and Gender, Feminist Theology, African American Religion and Theology, Jesus in Film and Pop Culture, and Discovering Disney. In addition to her work that we'll hear about tonight, she has published several notable pieces on pedagogy in the Mormon Studies Review and teaching theology and religion. And in 2012 was the recipient of the Elizabeth Schuster Fiorenza New Scholar Award for the Journal of Feminist Studies in Religion for her article From Testimony to Seximony, From Script to Scripture, Revealing Mormon Women's Sexuality Through the Mormon Vagina Monologues. Tonight, we will hear about her book entitled Womanpriest, Tradition and Transgression in the Contemporary Roman Catholic Church. Published in 2020, the book is available for free as an ebook, thanks to a grant from the Mellon Foundation Sustainable Monograph Series, and also available as a hard copy. And I just feel like this is an important detail to add. In addition to her academic work, she also leads and plays in a weekly co-ed adult field hockey club in the Triangle area of North Carolina. So welcome, Dr. Peterfeso.
Thank you, Kate. I'm really trying to push the idea that we're not just our work. So when Kate asked for bio, I'm like, you can tell them I play field hockey. I think that's good. Anyway, I'm really excited to be here. I see women priests that I've studied for over a decade here on this Zoom. I'm just really, really thrilled. So thank you for having me. To be introduced by Kate is really exciting too. So I've talked about my work a lot over the past year, but I haven't had the opportunity to talk with so many people who already understand so many of the ideas. It's more like, okay, so women aren't allowed to be ordained in the Catholic Church. Let's start there. You're like, I know that. Let's just get into the mess of things. So I'm really excited. So thank you for having me. All right, I'm going to share my screen. All right, can you see my slides okay? I can see just a few of you. Okay, thank you. Thanks. Awesome. All right, so Russ, the prayer you chose was so perfect for so many of the themes that I want to talk about today. So thank you. It's like kept hitting on Mary and embodiment and using the body and this holy disruptor of the ordinary. I wrote that down. I thought that was beautiful. So thank you. All right, I'm calling my talk Defiantly Serving in Persona Christi, Roman Catholic Women Priests Within 21st Century Catholicism. I'm really excited to be talking as part of a series on women erased, and a lot of the themes that I want to touch on today, whether it's about RCWP or my own research or the institution's reaction to both RCWP and my research, I think are so relevant to this question of women being erased, but also women finding empowerment as a result of that erasure, like having to carve out space to have a voice. And that's one of the things that I want to highlight. And I looked at the speakers you've had as part of the series, and I'm honored to be part of that. And I'm really grateful to your group for continuing scholarly conversations that are also pastoral in nature. What can we do to make the church better? So thank you. So what is the plan for today? I asked Deb how I should focus in our time together, and she was saying focusing on the relationship between the institution and the movement that I study, as well as like what that fraught relationship reveals to us, what's relevant about that, and how this movement to ordain women is shaping the church today. So I plan to touch on all of those things. I'm not going to try to give you a 30-minute summary of Womanpriest, the book. That would be silly. And the book is out there. You can get it. You can get it for free. Here's the book. If you haven't seen it. Oh, it's kind of blurry. But there's my book, and I'm really proud and I'm really excited. So please check it out. And not for me, but for the women who have spent so much time giving me their stories, their testimony, their witness. They deserve to be heard. That's one of the things that motivated me to keep going on this project for so long. So the premise, one of the premises of my topic, of my talk today is this, that even if you don't think women should be ordained, and my guess is the majority of you who are here do, but even if somehow you don't think women's ordination is something that the church should entertain, you still hopefully can understand and appreciate how deeply significant women priests are for understanding the problems of contemporary Catholicism, for envisioning solutions for healing, and for exposing the existing fault lines within the church. The questions that are sort of driving my talk for today, I need to slide this over, are twofold, really. The first is what can the very controversial topic of women's ordination reveal about contemporary Roman Catholicism, number one. And number two, what can women priests' embodied activism and embodied actions as creative agitators reveal about problems and possible solutions in today's Catholicism? Having trouble clicking through. Let's see. There we go. Before we get into the RCWP part of this, I want to acknowledge the current context that we are in 2021 American Catholicism. I know now that lots of you are not in America, so I apologize for sort of the North American focus. My guess is that some of these issues will still be familiar to you. I'm calling this sort of the messy noise that surrounds us right now, and that is part of any conversation we can have about women's ordination and women in the church and women's bodies. Really go through some of these really fraught topics. So I just pulled a bunch of headlines that I Googled. So this is going to sound, a lot of this is going to seem really familiar to us. So this was when I Googled Catholic Church women's bodies. And here are just some headlines. The top one is Jamie Manson from the New York Times. The Catholic Church's reproductive fight is about controlling women's freedom. Then we've got culture wars and women's bodies, why the Catholic Church is implicated in the politics of the far right. Catholics need a better way to talk about women's bodies. Here's a good place to start. The next one, I added abortion to my search. Texas bishops applaud Supreme Court ruling on abortion law. Pro-life Catholics, you can't end abortion without talking about, without taking on the patriarchy. And the Catholic Church has no moral argument on abortions. And then this one was all around these conversations about Joe Biden and communion. I dare you to deny me communion. What has happened to Catholicism in America? Here is a tweet that came out this summer. The U.S. Catholic Church doing everything it can to make people leave the church. Interesting marketing strategy. And then a letter to the editor, a church that would deny communion to Joe Biden has lost its way. My point is not to completely fully embody a liberal take on some of these issues, but to say we have to be thinking about these issues as we think about what I'm trying to talk about today. RCWP, women's ordination, women embodiment, women embodying priests, women embodying Jesus Christ. All of that is theologically relevant to these current struggles that we are having that are just in the news and all around us. So why do I study RCWP? Like, how did I even get here? And this is relevant for women erased. This is relevant for women empowered, for women's visibility. So I first heard about RCWP in November, it was probably October 2007, right before the ordination of Elsie and Rosemarie Hudson. They were going to be ordained in St. Louis, Missouri, which is my hometown. And they were going to be ordained in a Jewish synagogue, a Jewish temple that my Jewish relatives go to. So I knew their rabbi, and there was just all of this media storm going on. And I wasn't even in St. Louis at the time. I was living in North Carolina getting my doctorate. But I was really taken in by this story because I felt, I'm connected to the Catholic side as someone who's raised Catholic, but I was also connected to this Jewish group. And it was just so much, it was good drama playing out. And I was really drawn in. So separate from that, I needed a dissertation topic because this was about the time in my studies when I needed a dissertation topic. I wanted to do a project on St. Louis and St. Louis Catholicism because it's something that there are Catholics everywhere in St. Louis, but it's not really talked about or researched much. So I was going to be the person to do that. Long story short, I could not get into the Archdiocesan archives. I tried 3 times. I did everything my advisor said about how you get access to archives, and it didn't matter. I couldn't get in. I later learned that's pretty common in some dioceses, in some archdioceses. It depends on the rules that the archbishop or the bishop have set up. And it's not uncommon for women to not be allowed into archives. So that's frustrating. I was erased from the ability to do archival work that I wanted to do. Ironically, then I turned my attention to a group of renegade women who were defying the church and were really very happy to talk to me or to share documents with me or to say, hey, look at our videos, they're on YouTube. So the inability to do a traditional historical archival project became something that allowed me to learn about women who've also faced similar hurdles from the church. I continued in this pursuit of this project because I was really frustrated early on by some of the criticism that the women priests were receiving, not just from the patriarchs, not just from Catholic clergy, that was to be expected, but some of the things that like really well-established Catholic feminists and Catholic feminist theologians were saying about the women priests or some progressive groups. I just didn't seem fair from what I had come to understand about the women priests. So it seemed not that the women priests didn't deserve critique, because we should critically think about all things, especially if we're trying to write a dissertation about them. But I felt like the premise needed to be accurate, that we needed an accurate foundation, and there wasn't one yet. So again, I was trying to get the story straight because I felt the women deserved to have the story straight. And then I was also aggravated later on by some of the criticism that I was facing from peer reviewers or people that I would meet in conference settings when I would present on this research. And my frustration was that there seemed to be an assumption that I was just like the women priests I was studying, that there was no daylight between me and the women priests. It was as if like they assumed that the only reason a woman would write about women was if I thought and acted in the same way as the research subjects. I think this is a form of sexism as well. I've come to understand it as a form of sexism. So all of these little things that are like part of my story of coming to this project and trying to overcome hurdles, I'm like, oh yeah, that's kind of what Catholic women and the women priests I study have been dealing with for a very long time. So many of you know this, some of you are women, Roman Catholic women priests, part of the movement. So, but for those who may need a refresher, what is RCWP? The Roman Catholic Women Priest movement started in 2002 on the Danube River with the Danube 7, ordination of 7 women. It came to North America in 2005 with the ordination on the St. Lawrence Seaway, and then came to the United States with a Pittsburgh ordination in 2006. There are currently, I believe, still about 250 women worldwide, mostly in the United States and Canada, also South America, Taiwan, Venezuela. There are still a number of women priests in Europe, which is where the movement started. The movement ordains women as deacons, as priests, and as bishops. And because the movement has its own bishops, the women bishops are able to do the ordaining of priests and deacons. The group does not have any mandatory celibacy, so there will be a number of women priests who are mothers or grandmothers, and they weave that into their ministry and their public discourse about their ministry in some really effective ways. In 2010, what I've thought of as sort of RCWP, this big umbrella group, split into RCWP, Roman Catholic Womenpriest USA, and ARCWP, the Association of Roman Catholic Women Priests. So those are 2 sort of branches of one of the sort of like the bigger of the big tree. Generally in the book and in this talk, I sort of gloss together and say RCWP. I distinguish when that distinction is necessary. And a caveat, there are some men in the movement and have been from early on. And as of about 2019, 2020, there are there are, I believe, 2 people who identify as trans or non-binary. That just happened as I was like shipping the manuscript off. So they're not really in the book so much as just like a little notice, but I think that's a change in the movement that's really exciting, and it's definitely worth watching. Okay, so that's what RCWP is. What do they do? Specifically, the movement breaks Canon Law 1024. I'll show you in the next slide. Here is Canon Law 1024. It says, a baptized male alone receives sacred ordination validly. As of, I believe, this month, December of 2021, the women priests also break another canon law, which is a new canon, a change to Canon 1379, which now reads, the following incur a latae sententiae interdict, or if a cleric, also a latae sententiae suspension. Both a person who attempts to confer a sacred ordination on a woman and the woman who attempts to receive the sacred order incur a latae sententiae excommunication reserved to the apostolic see. A cleric may be punished by dismissal from the clerical state. Basically, this form of excommunication is one that happens automatically. Nobody has to really go through big paperwork to do it. It just sort of happens. Another way of thinking of it is women priests who attempt to be ordained have excommunicated themselves from the church with their actions. What they say, however, is that we are validly but illegally ordained. So while the church will say you are illegal and invalid because no woman can ever be ordained, the women priests will say, no, we are valid. We are valid because we have stood in the line of apostolic succession. We have followed your rules, Catholic Church, and so we consider ourselves valid, but we agree that we are happily breaking canon law because it is an unjust man-made law. So they reject this excommunication, and they reinforce and they speak from a position of saying that we were called. God did call us. And that is, in fact, a provocative thing to claim, because the church patriarchs will say that women cannot even be called, that women may think they have a vocation, but they are mistaken. So again, these are the many ways that RCWP is being provocative and just kind of like going right into it, like unapologetically saying, yeah, this is who we are, this is what we've done, and God wants us here. Why can't women be ordained in the Roman Catholic Church? I know some of you know all of this already. Here's the briefest of stories. It may surprise you to know that the formal doctrinal rejections of women's ordination are actually really young and date to the 1970s. So the first public statement saying that women cannot be ordained came in 1976 with a document called Inter Insignores. It came out in 1976 in English. This document is also known as the Declaration on the Admission of Women to the Ministerial Priesthood. So the CDF, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, which issued this document, argued that a priest must be able to stand in persona Christi, in the person of Christ, so that the faithful will recognize Jesus in the priest and that sacraments will work effectively. So another way to say this is this: because Jesus himself was male, a priest must be male, lest it become, and this is a quote, difficult for the faithful to see in the minister the image of Christ, end quote. Women thus cannot be effective priests because women cannot emulate Christ's maleness. And moreover, sacraments include significant indicators like the priest's gender that point the way to Christ. This language intensified in 1994 with John Paul II's Ordinatio Sacerdotalis. And in this document, the Pope writes, I declare that the church has no authority whatsoever to confer priestly ordination on women, and that this judgment is to be definitively held by all the church's faithful. So with that, he's saying it's not in the Vatican's power to make a change. Even if the Pope himself wanted to ordain women, he couldn't do it. So that is what came out in the mid 1990s. All of this hinges on bodies, gender identity, biological sex. Again, some of those themes that we saw on the headline slides that I showed before. This is about material bodies and symbolic theologized bodies. Catholic theological anthropology is at the heart of all this. And that says that men and women are biologically different, they're physically different, and thus they have different roles to play. And priesthood is a role reserved just for men. Insignoris says that Christ himself was and remains a man, and that his incarnation in a male body is a question of fact that cannot be associated from the economy of salvation. So don't even think about having women step into the role of priests. It would impact the very salvation of the faithful. So enter Roman Catholic Womanpriests. They do not simply ask for priests, but they have created priests. They do not simply challenge priesthood on a doctrinal level. It thwarts the notion that women cannot be priests by stepping into an ordained priestly role. The movement is not about women priests as an intellectual idea. It is about women priests taking on an embodied ministerial existence. The group's very existence is this constant ongoing protest against things like canon law, against things like gender complementarity, these ideas that say that women cannot have these roles. They're not only calling for reform. RCWP's protests, priestly protests, are allowing their women to create, embody, and live the Roman Catholicism that they envision, the Roman Catholicism that they believe is necessary to save and redeem the church in the 21st century. They resist the construction of priest as male by offering their priesthood as female bodies in action, lying prostrate during the litany of saints, pouring water over a child's head as he or she is being baptized, dressing in familiar clerical garments, raising their hands and arms and voice over the Eucharist. These women priests, the women priests, provoke and prod and push on Catholic traditional theological anthropology. And in so doing, they have the ability to destabilize Catholic priesthood and newly reinscribe the relationship between gender and Catholic authority. Their self-construction as women priests commences with the matter of their bodies doing. And in contrast to priesthood as sacramentally made, the women priests focus on bodies. And our academic focus on bodies here shows how priesthood is a construction that gets played time and time again in a performance of priesthood. And women priests are pushing against that in some really exciting ways. So why do they do this? Why are women priests moved to do this? So these are some of the things that came up time and time again in my interviews. Many of them want to see women priests before they die. They've been doing this activism since maybe the 60s or the 70s, and the time is now or never. A number of women priests told me that they want to leave their daughters and their granddaughters with a different type of Roman Catholic Church. And so they're motivated by future generations. All of them said they're answering God's call, that is at the heart of what is pushing them to be excommunicated from the church, to defy the church teaching. And this is what's really moving to me in the context of all those headlines. They want to save the church from within, believe that the church has need for change and that their activism is able to make that happen. There is a great quote from one of the women who told me, I want my presence to speak louder than my absence. And that's why she stays in this provocative position. And for all of this, they are excommunicated. And let's be really clear, you do not get excommunicated from the Roman Catholic Church for indifference. You don't get excommunicated for gently walking away. You get excommunicated for caring so much that you do really provocative things that the church deems schismatic. I want to look at 3 case studies of 3 women who invite us to think about priesthood and embodiment and the way that the women priests are using their priesthood to make Christological claims, to offer ministerial healing, and to suggest new ways of thinking through symbols. So I'm going to be talking about Jana Severodushenska, Marie Bouclin, and Father Anne Tropiano. So let's talk about Janice first. Here's some images of Janice protesting. And she has this great quote that's, it's not just statements and encyclicals, it's putting your bodies on the line. When starting to think about the intersections of protest, women's ordination, and modern day American Catholicism, Jana Severodushenska is a powerful illustration. She has said of the Roman Catholic Church and its ministry, it's not just statements and encyclicals, it's putting your bodies on the line. And she has done just that, put her body on the line in the position of protest. Here's a story about Janice that I love, and I included in the book. In 1998, feeling called to Catholic priesthood, she readied her body. She put on an alban cincture, which she'd ordered from a Protestant supply store. She covered herself in a coat, and she went to Christ the King Cathedral in her hometown of Lexington, Kentucky, where an ordination was taking place. She sat in the pew. And when the presiding bishop asked the candidates for ordination to come forward, Janice took off her coat and walked to the altar. She spoke. Bishop Williams, I'm called by the Holy Spirit to present myself for ordination. My name is Janice. I ask this for myself and for all women. She then prostrated herself. When she stood, she spoke again. I am all the oppressed women of the Bible. I am Sarah. I am Elizabeth. I am the woman who touched the hem of Jesus's garment. I came here today with the help of my patron saint, Saint Joan of Arc, hoping that you would ordain me. Will you ordain me? Janice recalls the bishop growling at her in a voice that reminded her of Darth Vader. She was instructed to return to her seat to stop disrupting the service. She remembers a cadre of ordained men surrounding her, ready to escort her back to her seat with force, perhaps, if necessary. After her speech, she returned to her seat in the pew. And during the sign of peace, she says, many moments later, the same bishop approached her and hugged her. And she hugged him in return. This was not the first nor last of Janice's public protests. She is something of a professional protester. Conversations with Janice revealed to me how her lifelong Catholicism and her Christology, her understanding of Jesus, and her personal, deeply incarnational theology inspire her to do these actions. Her Jesus is one who first and foremost became human. He took on flesh and blood and lived among God's people. And as a result, he was a leader who had to accept consequences, including and especially embodied bodily consequences. So Janice connects priesthood, protest, and Jesus Christ for us through her body. When a bishop once told her she was not a Catholic, she said in response, I am doing exactly what Jesus would be doing. I want to look at Marie Buclan as an example of the sex abuse crisis, because so many women priests talk about how the sex abuse crisis has motivated them to be a certain type of priest, a certain type of pastoral presence. So RCWP's new image of a priestly body has arrived on the contemporary Catholic scene at the most opportune time. In the wake of the Catholic sex abuse crisis, when the celibate male priest is viewed as having potentially predatory and dangerous sexual appetites, women priests' bodies offer the church a different idea of a Roman Catholic priest. Marie Buclan, who is a Canadian ordained woman, she believes that her ordained ministry has received so much attention because of the sex abuse scandal. I include a quote here from her. Perhaps the pedophilia scandal has hit this diocese particularly hard. Many Catholics have supported me. They believe it is time women and married men were ordained, that the church needs priests who understand the realities of ordinary life. They know I'm married, have raised 3 children, and have a grandchild. They also seem to know that my only motive is to serve and help heal the wounds of abuse in a church I love. Buclan suggests that audiences read her as a positive priestly figure, not only because she's not male, but because she's a wife, mother, and grandmother. And her actions read as healing and service-oriented. She is right to link support of RCWP with the sex abuse crisis. One interview that I conducted with a member of a RCWP congregation said that having a woman priest was changing her idea of priesthood, because she said, quote, I do not have fear of a woman priest wielding power over me in any way, because she includes us in decision-making for the community, and I don't have to fear her abusing me. So if male priest bodies inspire fear and distrust, women priests' bodies represent a new potential. Buclan and other women priests tie their priesthood to issues around sacramental power and the Eucharist, and perceived differences between male and female bodies, especially now in the wake of the sex abuse crisis. Buclan suggests, and other women priests will echo this, that they are more generously and graciously read and interpreted than male priests, and this allows them to enact a different type of Catholic priestly ministry and have a different type of relationship with the people they serve. The last example I have is Father Ann Tropiano, who was just ordained not even 2 months ago in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Interviews with Father Ann show her talking about how God is calling her. There's a very famous headline, I think, about famous in our circles, right? Future woman priest Father Ann blames God for leading her toward ordination. So again, you see that rhetoric of call, but it's even more aggressive. Blaming God for having brought this on her. Father Ann is consistently talking about her investment in justice. And she credits the Jesuits for leading her to a brand of Catholicism that really focuses on spiritual exercise and social justice. She has written, "I am focused on one task, above all, expanding the symbol of the Roman Catholic priest to include the body of a woman." She is provocatively and playfully pushing on Catholic symbols with her priesthood as a way of challenging the Catholic explanations for why women can't be priests and inviting Catholics to imagine new ways of understanding what a Christ-emulated priesthood looks like, that it could be a woman. She writes, quote, "My plan is to insert myself as fully as possible into the symbol of priest. If I am to expand the symbol, it is not enough to be a priest. I must also look the part. And so I will wear clerics, I will wear liturgical vestments, and I will go by the title Father. It is my hope that all of these layers will coalesce to expand the symbol of priesthood, at least for those in my little orbit. And maybe, just maybe someday, my efforts will join with the hope and work and prayer of so many to expand our collective Catholic imaginations too." I see Father Ann's very public and provocative pronouncements as being a step toward what I've called in the book, queering the priesthood. This is something that I'm looking for RCWP to do more of. There are times when RCWP really participates in traditional normalizing practices around gender, but also transgressive queering practices, sometimes simultaneously. So sometimes a group uses traditional gender complementarity to say, well, we need women to be priests because they are that other part of the male-female binary. But at other times, women priests I see them being much more provocative and destabilizing any sort of gender norms. So there's some contradictions there. I know it's all strategic, but there's still some contradictions there. So Father Ann is walking this traditional transgressive line with her priesthood. If she succeeds in helping with a symbol shift, she might well invite Catholics to better see a social justice Jesus in the person of a priest who defies unjust laws in order to better serve and guide people towards Jesus. Just imagine the theological implications here if one can look at a Roman Catholic womanpriest and see not a law-breaking woman who is defying proper authority, but in fact see Jesus Christ, one who is socially active, one who is social justice centered, and one who is focused on service. So conclusions, I have a few minutes of conclusions. When I started this talk, I asked us to think through some of the lenses of contemporary conflict, like the abortion debate, patriarchal authority and control of women's bodies, denying communion to democratic politicians, Catholic democratic politicians, and the Roman Catholic movement. What do these all have in common? All of this connects for me through gender construction and bodies and Eucharist and power and authority. All of these are interconnected. They also provide hints to places of possible schism in the coming years of American Catholicism and probably other Western Catholicisms, but I'm thinking largely of America. They also, however, these might provide hints for where we can find healing. So what if women priests are not a problem for the Roman Catholic Church, but a solution? As I've shown, they're not just activists who are provoking an intractable Rome. They're not just banging on Rome's door, trying to be annoying, wanting to be admitted to the system the way that it exists. Rather, they are first and foremost ministers of the gospel, and they are out to change the system. For all of the pain the patriarchal church has caused, RCWP wants to help. They believe that they can change the church for future generations by offering the kind of sacramental pastoral care and presence that a patriarchal and increasingly mean-spirited Roman Catholic priesthood cannot and will not. Where the church, US church, says it's male priests alone, have the power to transform bread and wine, women priests invite all present at the Eucharist to transform, to make present Jesus in the bread and wine. Where the church says no, the women priests say all are welcome. At times when so many American Catholics are leaving the faith, it's about half, is what the latest Pew study seemed to suggest. While American bishops are closing doors and defining people out of Catholicism, women priests invite people back in. While American bishops want to withhold communion, women priests welcome all to open table Eucharists. While the Catholic liturgy tells massgoers that they are not worthy to receive Christ, women priests modify the prayer and say, I am worthy to receive you. While the bishops want to control women's bodies, preventing women from embodying Christ through priesthood, women priests, many of them mothers and grandmothers themselves, proclaim with their priesthood that they too, as women, can stand in persona Christi, in the person of Christ, before God and before a Roman Catholic congregation. Imagine, how might Roman Catholics see women and women's bodies differently if women could be validly and legally ordained? How might the Roman Catholic Church treat women differently and treat their struggles as women differently if Catholics were taught and believed that everyone, male, female, non-binary, trans, could resemble Christ? How might the political activism of Roman Catholic bishops change if ordained women had a seat at that table? Now, it may seem that I'm arguing that the only thing the Roman Catholic Church needs is Roman Catholic women priests. I wish I thought it was that simple. I don't. But I do think that RCWP is representing and living out what a lot of Roman Catholics want ministerially and pastorally. And I think that RCWP is provoking exactly the kinds of questions and issues that need to be provoked. RCWP has successfully been provoking a sleeping bear of the Roman Catholic Church for about 2 decades. And while their ordinations have not been approved or validated, they do continue to evolve their messages and ministries to remain relevant to contemporary conflict. My final words are about hope. It is Advent after all, and hope is a central theme. Why do women priests give me hope? The hope I take from RCWP is not a foolhardy hope that the movement is going to be the silver bullet that will fix the Roman Catholic Church. I take hope and I find awe in the women priests' faithfulness to Roman Catholicism in spite of Roman Catholicism's sexist elements and oppressive histories. I admire the women doing this work because I admire their hope. I often find myself growing very cynical about things right now. The US is kind of a mess. The US bishops and their actions, the dangerous and disingenuous discourse around abortion, the predicted end of American democracy and other democracies around the world. It is hard to find reasons to hope. And when it's hard to find hope, it's hard to find reasons to act. But when studying the women priests for nearly a decade, I studied women who were not only walking uphill, but were doing so as huge wind gusts issued forth from the Roman Catholic institution and tried to blow them off course. And not only were they walking uphill in strong wind gusts, but they were carrying on their backs the burdens of rejected Catholics and the trauma of sex abuse victims and the longing from people who want to be seen and valued by a church that does not see or value them. So if that's not an act of tenacity and commitment and theological strength and hope, I don't know what is. I don't know what passes for hope besides that. So I admire them in so many ways for what they are trying to do and what they are accomplishing. So while women priests are answering some questions and finding new ones, they are stepping into Catholicism embodied in persona Christi, and creating communities and honoring their understanding of God's call. And they invite us to consider what it would mean for us if all women's bodies could be acknowledged to have a natural resemblance to Jesus. In that way, I see my book as an act of gratitude to a movement that makes physically possible, physically visible, a hope for an inclusive Catholic future. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill.
Yeah, thanks.
So we're going to move. I really appreciate your, that was a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
So we're going to move right now into a question and answer section of the evening. And what I would like folks who have questions for Jill to do is to use that little reaction at the bottom that you raise your hand, or if you can't find that, just do this and I will make sure that I see your hand and that you get your questions answered. So I was just wondering, as people are thinking about what they want to ask you, Jill, what about the sort of demographic, the age range of women, of Roman Catholic women priests? And in terms of that, what is, how do you see as a researcher the future of the movement? I mean, in a way, it's sort of like Vatican II Catholics and, just all of us, in the Reform movement, there's we tend to skew older. So what do you think about that in terms of this movement?
I mean, it's absolutely true. The demographic is definitely older. I had this info at one point, but most of I say this, I think most of the women priests saw Vatican II as had an awareness of what was going on during Vatican II. Father Anne is younger. There have been a few women priests who are younger, but I know I've read Kate's awesome review from the National Catholic Reporter of the book, and I mean, she mentioned the study that was done, and yeah, it's not like 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds are rushing to join the church in that fashion, in a sort of as valid but illegal ordained. So it's an older movement. I still take hope from it, as I was saying, but I don't think it's suddenly going to be thousands of women. I don't know where it's headed, but you're right, the demographic is older. That's still my understanding.
Thank you. So I see John McNamara, you have a question?
Yes, Jill, thanks so much for your presentation. I loved the sense of hope that you portrayed. That's really amazing. And, so many of these women, I think, are really heroic figures. One of the questions, though, that frequently comes up, and you might be able to handle this, is in terms of different segments in the church and their acceptance of women's ordination, like particularly people who mentioned the church in Africa and countries like Nigeria and areas where the church seems to be growing in large numbers, and they may not seem as ready as, say, the church in America to accept women priests. Any thoughts on that, Jill?
I think you just nailed it. I mean, I say this to my students a lot because, my students are largely young Americans, and they're like, well, why can't the church do this? Why can't fill in the blank with any Catholic or Christian group? And they think it should just be obvious. When it comes to Catholics, I'm like, you're looking at a global church, and it is growing in places that are not here. It is not growing by leaps and bounds in the US. It is not growing in Western Europe. So, from a strategic perspective, the church, the Vatican has no reason to say, yeah, we see you Western Catholics. We know what you want. You want to be more progressive. Okay, we'll do it. Because that would alienate the growing populations that don't want women's ordination, that don't want gay marriage. Yeah, so I just affirm everything you're saying. That's a problem for a church that continues to be global and see itself as Catholic in the universal sense.
Thanks so much, Jill.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, John, for your question. Someone sent me a message that says, Dan McFadden, you have your hand up. You're not showing up on my screen. So if you want to unmute and ask your question, go ahead.
Yes, Jill, thank you for your wonderful presentation. When you're speaking about hope, I also have hope with the Pope and with the Synod, and it'll be interesting to see if we get the kind of listening that we hope to get, because as a Catholic, a lifelong Catholic, I certainly made my my views known to the listening sessions regarding openness and inclusiveness in the Catholic Church, including women priests, of course. You have hope in this area?
I have so little institutional hope, I'm afraid, but so when Pope Francis was selected, I heard all of the, oh yes, we got like a social justice priest, or who's now, he's going to be the Pope. And I'm like, I'm worried that the positive face of Catholicism will distract from things that still matter, like women's ordination. Like, oh, we're at least we're talking about the poor now. We don't have to talk about women's ordination for a while. So I mean, when you look at what the popes have said about women's ordination, nobody is saying that the door is opening. I was on a panel with Phyllis Zagano just a couple of weeks ago, and I'm still really intrigued by what's going on with all the stuff that she's been connected to. And so maybe there'll be a little cracks around the diaconate. I'm not sure, but I don't know, for reasons that go back to John's question a minute ago, that the church has no incentive to do some sort of global shift on this. I don't think. I hope to be wrong. It's funny that I'm like being thanked for my hopefulness when I'm also so cynical about institutional things, but hope from individuals doing things that are faith-filled. Definitely, I have that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dan. Betty, you have a question.
Yes, and I see it in the chat that we want to link to your book. So
Okay.
if somebody would kindly put that in. I remember way back in Call to Action, I don't know how many years ago, was the first time I attended a liturgy with the more or less earlier days in the women's ordination movement. And I saw 12 women up there and I cried. I just had to cry because it was in my lifetime that I could experience that. So I don't have a lot of hope either. I think Pope Francis is doing wonderful things. He's also an Argentinian male. So I just, so I live in hope that these women are simply doing it and going ahead. If I was 30 years younger, I'd be maybe in line. But anyway, thanks so much for bringing all this to us. Thank you.
But what Betty is saying, I've heard so many times, and I mean, maybe you all have heard it also so many times, but I saw women at the altar and like how it pushes every single button within us. I heard that story so many times from women as young as like teenagers to older women who were seeing it for the first time. It's transformative. I mean, representation matters. Like this seems like such a trite thing to say in this, but because it's not just, oh, look, there's a woman doing a job. It's, oh my God, there's a woman standing in for Christ. And that's really what I'm trying to get at with the presentation, that these theological underpinnings like bubble up and impact how we talk about abortion, how we talk about, oh, we should deny communion of all things to the president, the only second Catholic president in America's history, because of his stance on abortion. Thank you for what you're sharing. And I think if women priests, I know I have some of these stories throughout the book, women priests making a small impact, I don't think is small. I don't know that women priests need to transform a 1 billion member church in order to have a tremendous spiritual and theological impact. Sometimes the little things are the only things we can do, but they can have tremendous weight.
Thank you, Betty. Thanks, Jill. I was thinking also about what I heard from a theologian a number of years ago that really, really impacted me. She said, as good as Catholic social teaching is, think how much better it would be if women had always been around the table, developing all of our policies, all of our teachings, all of our canon law and all those things. And I thought, and she said, just like maternal mortality, you never see it in a Catholic social doctrine. So there's so many things that women would add and change. It's just incredible. It's mind-boggling to think of.
And if I can
Rose,
I'll
go
just
ahead.
say really quickly on that, like as I was prepping for this talk and some other talks, I read so much of what you just said, Deb, and it wasn't all from liberal women. A lot of it was from conservative women who are like, let's do better. Like we could have such better rhetoric around women. So this isn't just a liberal progressive appeal. I think a lot of women want this.
So Rosa, you have a question.
Forgive me, Jill. Thank you very much. This has been wonderful. It's more of a comment. I'm one of the women priests, and I just wanted to share that my call, well, first of all, when we're called to stand in the person of Christ, we're being called to stand in the person of the anointed one, not necessarily Jesus, but the anointed one. And that doesn't see gender. And when I first felt the call to be ordained, actually found a way to get ordained. It wasn't to make a comment that women can get ordained. It was because I had a call. I have a call to the priesthood. And if I make any impact, I hope it's that the institution will recognize before it crumbles to the ground that it needs to test the call of anyone who has been sent by God, and that God sends the least likely person, not the one that we think should stand in. God sends a shepherd boy. God sends in a henpecked husband. God sends in the strangest people. One comment also, I would love to see in the breakdown of the people in RCWP, also how many women of color are part of being ordained and where that is going. And I feel that I am ordained not to wear a vestment or stand in back of an altar, none of that. I have been called to go and minister to the largest Roman Catholic denomination, which are former Catholics, cultural Catholics, recovering Catholics, hell no, anything but a Catholic. And that's where I'm at. I'm out there.
Thank you. Can I ask real quick, the correction you offered, stand in persona Christi, is about standing in the person of the anointed one. Is your comment that it's not about standing in for Jesus who is male, but for the anointed one who could be male, female, non-binary, trans? Is it a gender thing? Was that?
Well, part of it is just me being snide. If we want to play the misogyny cha-cha with the Vatican,
yeah,
I'll use your words. Standing in the person of the Christ means standing in the person of the anointed one. And I can buy that. But if you're saying standing in the person of Jesus, well, forgive me, but how many of you are circumcised? And don't tell me that was already decided.
Yeah, good. Yeah, and how many of you are Jewish and how many of you have olive skin,
Right.
et cetera, et cetera. Got it.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
I thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rosa. Thank you. Julie, you have a question.
Yeah, I was wondering in your thesis and in your book whether you did any sort of process or similarity analysis with, can't hear me?
I'm trying to look at somebody who's speaking, but I'm looking, okay.
Oh, all right, well, let me get the video on and I'm.
Oh, it's okay, it's fine.
Okay.
I understand not wanting to show your video. I was looking,
Okay.
I think, the wrong place. Okay, I'm listening now.
In your thesis or in your book, did you do any analysis with regard to comparisons or process or issues that are similar or different in the Episcopal ordination of women priests?
Yeah, I mean, in one of the history chapters early on, the context chapters are like, hey, here's the Philadelphia 11 and all the ways that they were inspirational for the Danube 7. So that foundation, and also the ways that the Catholic Church, I mean, So the Philadelphia 11 was in 1974. I'm pretty sure it wasn't 73, 74. And then we get Inter and Signoris in 76, 77. Like, that's not a coincidence. So a lot of the intensifying rhetoric coming out of Roman Catholicism about women not being able to be ordained is a reaction to women being ordained in the Episcopal and Anglican traditions. So I do look at some of that. I hope I'm answering your question. I also do look a bit at these comparisons with Protestant traditions that have been ordaining women for a really long time. And I know a lot of ordained Protestant women who are good friends. That's what happens when you go to divinity school. But that doesn't necessarily mean the grass is greener. In fact, a lot of Protestant women who are ordained sort of have internalized misogyny because they're like, well, I have nothing to complain about. I can be here. Whereas Catholic women are really good at standing their ground because they know that the system is the problem. So those are some of the things that I talk about a little bit in the book. Yeah.
Thanks, Julie. So there's two Julies. Julie Murray, you had a question. Thank you.
That was it.
Thank Neighbor you. Dog is pregnant, buddy. Do you know anything about that?
Thank you so much
Neighbor's dog.
For your presentation. It's very, very clear and very helpful to me. I have struggled with this whole question for many years as I've been doing spiritual direction for 45 years now and have never felt called myself to be a priest, but have listened to the anguish of those who want others who are women to be ordained and lead. What I keep coming around to, though, is the question that it's as if the Roman Catholic Church has a fail-safe valve built in. And that is the hierarchy that claims only we get to say. And every time over history from, well, I'm not a church historian, but every time I know of in church history, when anyone has addressed that, challenged it, said, no, what you say isn't necessarily the truth, that has meant excommunication and schism and the proliferation of other Christian communities. So I ask myself, as I continue to see the immense corruption and hypocrisy in the Roman Catholic Church being lived out structurally everywhere, why do I cling to the hope that those of us that share this point of view about the ordination be available to all? Why is that? Why do I cling to that when I see that the message of Jesus and the living of the gospel and his life in the world has been spread precisely by objecting and allowing the people at the top, the ones that Benedict XVI said, fine, if you want to leave, we'll have a purer, more orthodox church. It's like there's a fail-safe, there's a no-win in this. So more and more as I age, I pray that more of us understand that we are experiencing the Paschal mystery, the death that has to come in order for new life. So I wonder, you know, for you as a theologian and historian specialized in this arena, why you think it's so important for this to change by some kind of victory within the Roman Church of women's ordination. it's a genuine question.
I'm trying to follow the question exactly. So it's, what can women's ordination do to change 2,000 years of an oppressive fail-safe system?
Yeah, I guess that would be a way of saying it. Yeah.
So I worry that I haven't quite understood your question. I will try to address what I think, what was coming to my mind as you were talking. I teach history of Christian traditions. I'm currently teaching New Testament. People in power want to stay in power. That's pretty obvious. And they create structures that ensure that their form of authority will continue to perpetuate. And that is Christian history. And it came to a head over a few centuries that led to the Protestant Reformation. It's in some ways oversimplified, but also a very true story. It wasn't Luther one day slapping some things on a door. It was building to that. So are we 500 years out from the Protestant Reformation at a new turning point? I've heard some of the women priests say that maybe that's true. Like, here we are again. It's time for another rupture. It's time for another birthing of new creativity. I think there are a couple different metaphors we could use. Maybe that's where we're at as humans. I don't know if I'm quite addressing what you're talking about, but in these ruptures or in the new life that comes from things that are shifting, might women take a place that's more significant, more meaningful for this time and place? I mean, in some ways, the church can't address what's going on in this time and place. I think they've proven that they are moral failures on a lot of issues. Women have a cleaner slate, especially if they don't step into the institution as the institution currently exists, which is why I've constantly heard RCWP saying, no, if the Pope calls us tomorrow and says, come on in, we're going to say no, you need to make changes first. And I think that could be life-giving for the movement or for other women who follow in their footsteps, because the institution itself, I think, needs a big shakeup. Have I answered anything like you were getting at?
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay.
Thanks, Julie. Thank you, Jill. So I'm just going to point out that we are getting at close to 10 after 9 and we're already running over. But so I'm going to take a couple more questions, but they're just, I mean, this could probably go on forever and ever. So Bridget, you're next in line. So would you ask her, and please try to keep, and please try to keep everybody who's got questions left, please try to keep it straight and to direct questions so that we can move through the people that have questions.
Jill, is there going to be a part 2? Because that's what I would love to see you do, because the movement is growing, and some of the questions that you asked or commented about, we are getting. One of my ordinations in June will be a woman of color who's a theologian from Vanderbilt. Our younger women are coming from Latin America in Colombia. What you wrote about needs to be expanded into what are the changes now? 20 years, we would love to see a follow-up with the movement and with our communities. So take that as an invitation and an affirmation and a thank you.
Yeah, and this is the struggle of writing a book. Because I finished research in about 2015, 2016, and it still took another few years. So I'm like, I'm never studying living people again because it keeps changing. And then I feel like, it goes to print and I'm like, wait, now there's a non-binary woman priest after I spend a whole chapter being like, there needs to be non-binary women priests. So I hear you and thank you. And I agree. And I hope others will continue to study you all. And I hope I can continue to follow the amazing things you all are doing, because I know it's constantly evolving. So thank you.
Thank you, Bridget. Thank you, Jill. I mean, honestly, we're so appreciative of your work and your research, and that you're bringing this angle to this study. I mean, this is really, really important for us now. Carol, you've got a question. Carol Dempsey.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jill, very much. And I too am a biblical scholar and a theologian, and I have read your book cover to cover.
Thank you.
And, you know, it's wonderful because I just finished an article that will be published. It's called Oppression, Resistance, and Reform, Revisiting the whole issue of priestly ordination, in which I do an analysis, as you've done with this too, but of all of the documents going back. And what we have here, somebody said, is there any hope? To be honest, I don't see any hope right now, because in my study of this, it's all systemic hegemonic power, and it's proof texting, and it's document building on document. And the latest is Vatican the new thing on canon law that is coming out. Now we know, okay, so canon law, but Francis put it in right in book 6 there. And it's the penal code that he's talking about for the abuses of pedophilia. And right there, it's never been stated before that women will be excommunicated, and those ordaining them who seek ordination. It's never been written into canon law, and now it is, and it's coming out December 8th, the Feast of the Immaculate Conception.
Oh, how nice for us.
Which is,
oh, you're right. They did do that.
Right.
Again, mean-spirited. It's mean-spirited.
Exactly. You know, and that's why I had to write this article, and I take all of them to task. And it's Burke and it's Levada, and they're all following the same thing. And what's interesting is their arguments, they don't even follow their own teaching that says, okay, follow historical critical, which we know is problematic. They use doctrinal approach all the way down. So they don't even listen to their own teachings on interpretation of scripture, interpretation of documents. It's all about systemic power. That's all it is. And my conclusion with all of this is the women priests, the whole movement's got to move forward. It's got to move forward, because don't worry about being included in the institution. Don't worry about, you know, in one sense, oh, being excommunicated, because that's how things change. Things change on the margins. They don't change from the center. And if we think women priests are going to be part of the center, we got another guest coming.
Well, we're lucky that these women priests don't want to be part of that center.
Exactly.
I think that's so great. Carol, send me a copy of your article when it's written, please.
Thanks.
I'd love to read it.
So thanks, Carol. Corey, you have a question or a comment?
A question, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, so Jill,
I've seen you on YouTube. So nice to see you on here.
Yeah, it's great to see you too. I've used your book in classes. It's cited in my dissertation. You mentioned, you know, you had hope for RCWP continuing its process of queering sort of Catholicism. And so I guess I just want to like tease with that a bit. And so sort of, you know, if you were to engage in speculative fiction, which is one of my happy places, what are some ways that you could see the movement both queering itself and queering the wider church?
Yeah. Gosh, speculative fiction. Now, you're going to send me down a rabbit hole. So I end the book with this image that I love from the women priest church that I go to when I go home. And there's a nativity image where it's Joseph holding Mary, holding Jesus. That is such a traditional image of family, and it's the nativity. So we don't necessarily want to, you know, upend the nativity, but maybe we do want to upend the nativity. Like, what if we start playing with those sorts of symbols and those images? Like, does it need to be male, female? Might the woman be in the stronger position? Because in this image that I love so much, it's like Joseph is bigger and then Mary is smaller and then there's little Jesus. So, I mean, I think of Catholicism and so much iconography and images. I mean, there's so much playing with images that could be done. And that's not even like, you know, for younger people, even that provocative anymore. Like, we're used to seeing founding fathers played by people of all races, right? I mean, like, these are things that we are doing in a culture. I think continuing with prayer, like changing prayers to not have traditional language. But I also think, I mean, honestly, you, Corey, and others who are being public about their priesthood and making visible a different type of visibility. Because as I said in this talk, and I say in the book, like, priesthood is a performance. I mean, this is like Judith Butler 101, like it's iterative and performed over and over again. So how can we reiterate? What are some new images that can come out of that? So I'm, in the interest of time, very quickly answering that. Do you have any one awesome idea? Because you probably would, especially if you're talking about this with students. Please tell me.
I don't, but just like to pick up on the Butler comment that you made at the end there, you know, one of the things from Butler's analysis of gender as performative is that it has power, right? Things come into being through, it's not just a performance, right? So
it constructs,
by
meaning,
imagining,
right.
So, you know, if there are many things in the church that perhaps need to be deconstructed, by constructing and living out new ways, you know, perhaps that is in itself the querying that needs to happen, right? And then new models of church that might emerge from that might look very different from what hierarchies do. And then I think then that's going to be a little uncomfortable, probably, because it might mean that those traditional comforting images, like the Nativity, have to look different, right? In order to reflect the wider church and not just what traditions happen. But thank you so much.
Absolutely. What Corey was just saying, well, one, I think this is how maybe you get young people back in the church. So, I mean, I think a lot of this is possibly how young people start to see, like, seeing themselves and their values reflected. But 100%, I think ideas, structures, systems create the reality in which we inhabit. And so that's why queering the priesthood can be so valuable. And that's why we're stuck in gender binaries, because it's been constructed over and over again and performed over and over again. So there's real creative potential. It was exciting to talk to you, Corey. Thank you.
Amen. One more question. I hate to do this, but we would just be here all night if I didn't.
Deb, is it possible, Deb, to if I can get the chat, because people are sending me messages and I'm definitely not seeing them right now. So if I could get a copy of the chat, but if I could, I'm happy to try to answer questions outside of this setting for people who still want to engage.
Yeah, so. that's what I was going to do, is invite people to send the questions to either me or put them in the chat and we will send it to you.
And if I could get the chat, because people have said nice things. I just want to make sure I can read them.
Yeah, great. We'll do that. So Alice, go ahead.
Hi, Alice.
Yeah, real quickly, I just want to piggyback on what you're just saying there, Jill. I was ordained in 2007, joined in 2006, and I've had a community with a married priest since 2010. And recently, this is a hope story. I don't look to the past and I don't look to the institution, kind of like looking at an abusive husband and thinking he's going to change someday, move on. A colleague called me, a former colleague that I taught with, called me so distressed because her 15-year-old daughter refused to get not ordained, but to confirmed, because the priest who was doing the instructions with this class was insisting that every one of them swear that they believed every single teaching of the church in order for him to pass them to be confirmed. And she stood up, her daughter, and challenged him and said, I don't believe that God condemns LGBTQ. I have relatives, I have friends. She stood her ground. She stood her ground on pro-choice. She stood her ground on a whole bunch of things. He threw her out of the class. And she went home and her mother was so distressed. So her mom called me and she said, I know that you're a woman priest. Would you talk to her about how important this is to be confirmed in the church? And I said, well, I'll be happy to talk to her, but I'm not going to guarantee anything. So I met her for coffee and I asked her a lot of questions. Her faith, her commitment to the future of the church was so strong in terms of the model of inclusivity and diversity. And she refused to hypocritically go along with this bully priest who happened to be a former seminary classmate of mine, 1/3 my age, just what I call the priest pups, arrogant and condescending and everything that we dislike and just have such distaste for. but he was insisting, and she said, I cannot in good conscience do that. We met then for 6 times for about 2 hours. Her faith was so strong and so mature. And I invited her to be confirmed in my community on a Sunday morning. And she was ecstatic because she said, you look like me. Obviously, she was young. I'm not. That's where I put my energy and my focus. I don't worry about the institution. They're going to die in their dresses, and that's that. These young people are the future, and that's where I think we have to put our energies, offering them the alternative without looking over our shoulder or trying to get those guys to come along or beating down their door. I don't give a damn. I'm going to do what I was called to do. I don't need their permission. I'm a girl of the 60s, not going back there.
I love that story. Thank you.
Deb, I just want to say something, interrupt here. On behalf of the 285 Roman Catholic Womanpriest members, I really want to publicly thank you, Jill, for what you've done for us, and you, Deb and Russ, for taking this on for Future Church. So frequently we just, we're like we have the plague and nobody wants to even touch it or deal with the subject, and Women's Ordination, of course, has been doing it. But never have we had this kind of exposure for Roman Catholic women priests. So I, with all my heart, as one of the bishops, thank you. And I just want to call attention to all of you, 300 people or whatever on this. If you have not checked our websites, please go to the Roman Catholic Womanpriest website. The association has a website, and Canada has a website where you'll get all kinds of information. And we invite you to check out our worshiping communities, because there are probably 75 to 80 of them now. So I just think that's how you can help continue this whole process. So I really, really thank you all. Thank you.
Thanks, Susan. So thank you all, and thank you, Jill, for your wonderful presentation, for your continued research. And I agree, we look forward to part 2 and 3 and 4 as you look at this from your own perspective. We really, really have enjoyed it. So